Hello and welcome. Today's guest is an Emmy award-winning composer, performer, and public speaker whose work redefines the role of music as a transformational resource to integrate emotional and spiritual intelligence into the fabric of our lives. He has recorded and musically enhanced the spoken wisdom of many of the world's most influential thought leaders, including Deepak Chopra, Bob Proctor, Desmond Tutu, and Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, among many others. Through his company, wisdomoftheworld.com, he creates, fosters, and facilitates ways to face life transitions with more gratitude and grace. He co-created the globally acclaimed listening resource, Graceful Passages, with the creative healing team of Michael and Doris Stillwater. He has spent the last 4 decades creating music for all forms of media. And over the last 20 years, his transformative work has supported nearly 1 million people to accept life's losses with greater compassion and acceptance. Please welcome Gary Malkin to the show. Welcome, Gary. It is such an honor and a privilege to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's delightful to be here with you.
Wow, you have quite a journey in music, over 4 decades. Tell us a little bit about that journey and what was your genesis?
Oh my God. The story goes, I was at a friend's house, a new friend's house. I grew up in Long Island in the suburbs of New York. And I was waiting for my mom to pick me up, and I found this strange, shiny black object in the living room, and something pulled me towards it. And I remember touching the key, which I didn't know what it was. And suddenly this sound came back, and I just started playing a melody, and it felt lonely. So I started playing a harmony, and my mother walks in to pick me up, and the friend's mother says, "I didn't know he studied piano." And she said, "I didn't either." So what I discovered especially these last few years is that um, I came into this world with a deep need for presence. And of course, said the great joke of it is that there was zero amount of presence in my family, dysfunctional Jewish family life. So the moment I touched the piano, it was literally like Dorothy coming out of the black and white hurricane-strewn cottage, and cinema color, technicolor music suddenly provided something for me that nothing had ever done before, which was a way to drop into the miracle of life, which is what music has always done for me. So yeah, no, and I knew from maybe 6, 7 years old, I wanted to write a musical and I want to do film composing. And I was pretty directed from a very young age. And mostly I loved the way in which music brought people together in the heart. And I made it a career around that.
That is incredible. So many people love music, but don't get to make a career out of it. And the magic that you have facilitated, the expression that you have facilitated, the connection that you have facilitated through your music is really astounding. 1 million people, and those are just the ones you know about. Now imagine how many millions of people all across the world your music has touched. Well done, sir.
Thank you.
Well done.
For me, it's all about how do we create a more heart-centered world? And how do we actually look at how present we are, not just in our obsessed frontal lobe, linear rational mind, but how coherent are we in our hearts, our bodies, our souls, and our minds in partnership with the unitive field, right?
Yes.
And what I've discovered is I've developed ways in which music can entrain us into the one unitive experience, right? Which is really fun to unpack and to explore. And a lot of it has to do with certain harmonies and melodies and experiences. But bottom line, it's about allowing and creating the parting of the seas of spaciousness.
Yeah.
There is less and less entrainment to the spaciousness that allows for our natural oneness and wholeness come back online and make it available to all of who we are. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So, in today's narrative and today's culture of doing all the things and the accolades and the race to achieve, the race to consume, the race up the ladder, right? The race to keep up with the Joneses. What do you feel is among the most important challenges that we're facing? You're talking about being present, you're talking about creating spaciousness, and the vast majority of people are on a rat race. So,
Right.
what do you feel is among the most important challenges for us right now?
I often use this as an analogy that when I studied the Diet for a New America, John, I'm forgetting his name. Anyway, the idea of the soil losing more and more of its nutritive power over the last 100 years as a result of the overuse and the incorrect use and the use of pesticides. The analogy is our soil is our capacity to assimilate and know. And the way I look at it is we have a mental way of assimilating. That's the mental intelligence. We have a heart way of assimilating and knowing. That's heart intelligence. We have a body, somatic, soul, spiritual, right? These are all rivers leading to the ocean of our unit of experience. And what I've noticed is that the obsession with technology and devices and the obsession with the certainty and the need for certainty around linear rational thinking and the speed of linear rational thinking has not only subjugated our other forms of intelligence, it's actually, in some cases, kicked it out of even being important in this culture. And I think that is one of the contributing factors to why we're in the mess we're in right now with Mother Earth, with mental health, with addiction, with hyper reductionist mechanistic models in medicine. So my priority is to help give music its fulfillment of its destiny. And one of the things that I believe music has a destiny for is in training us into a remembrance of who we really are, which is not just human doings, not just human thinkings, not just human solvings, but human beings. That is enough, not only enough, it's the greatest obstacle to us moving forward with our sense of passion and purpose for who we really came here to be in this world. So I call it an epidemic of what I call awareness fragmentation disorder. And I think that it's something that we don't expect to look at when we're on a line together. Like say we're on a video call right now. I'll see. Very few people are actually looking at who is present and how engaged are we in our heart, our mind, our soul to take each experience in a way that would change the conversation instead of focusing on the GDP at any cost? What if it had to do with a deeper conversation on the quality of our lives and our relationships and our way of living? So that's a little bit of a tip of the iceberg of why I think coherence and presence could very well be the most important component to focus on for the evolution of the human species.
Absolutely. And we're really at a precipice of change, right? We're at a time in history where people are awakening to the need to become present again, to stop being a human doing or a human thinking, as you referenced it, and actually be a human being, to come back, to be present, and to reflect. If there's one gift of COVID, the gift was to sit us all down and give us that time and that spaciousness to say, wait a minute, what am I doing?
Exactly.
How am I living? Is this what I want to do? Do I love my life? Do I love the relationships that I'm building or that I'm in? Do I love the work that I'm doing? Do I feel like I'm making a contribution? Do I feel valued? And so on. And I think a corollary of that time for reflection is a wave of grief, right? A wave of realizing that maybe I'm not happy, or maybe I haven't done what I came here to do, or maybe I haven't prioritized the things that I should be prioritizing, or Maybe I've let relationships go or let them wither because I was so busy in the hustle chasing everything. And there was really a profound sense of grief that a lot of people were navigating, as well as fear and overwhelm, fear of the uncertainty and the unknown.
Exactly.
But I know you talk a lot about grief. And why do you feel that this wave of grief, and particularly unassimilated grief, can be so dangerous? What can
Yeah.
we do about it?
Yeah. I love that this is a really important subject because also we are in a world where the mainstream first developed countries avoid aging, illness, death, loss, right? We avoid it,
Yeah.
right? And the famous passage from the Bhagavad Gita, 5,000-year-old Hindu text, says, paraphrase, what is the most remarkable thing in all of the world? And the most remarkable thing in all of the world, as they say 5,000 years ago, is that everyone is going to die, but no one ever thinks it's going to happen to them. That's also true. Everyone is going to experience loss. But if you don't have a strategy for metabolizing loss, you are as famous by this book called The Body Knows the Score and all these other Peter Levine and The Storage of Trauma and Gabor Mate and talking about the myth of normal. These are books that are uncovering now the cost of our toxic culture's obsession with youth and avoidance of death, dying, grief, and loss, right? Now, what you check out this statistic. A very famous grief expert by the name of Dr. Kenneth Druck. Ken Druck is a beloved friend. I've known him for many years. He's a he basically said he's the one that often goes on CNN after the big mass shootings for years, right? And he said over 90% of all aberrated acts and words, all acts of violence or words of violence come from unassimilated grief. So what we're saying here is on the micro level, all the way to the macro, which is on world peace, our understanding of efficient ways to metabolize, to assimilate, to address grief is what separates us between a world that's more thriving and peaceful with less domestic violence and a world that is not at war with one another as well on a macro scale with nations, right? This dynamic is so misunderstood because people are afraid if I don't go there at all, I can avoid it. But what happens, and then they think if I open that keg, I'll never stop crying and it'll go on forever. And what the greatest indigenous elders, my teacher was Archon Lushwala, says, grief is meant to be incineratingly hot, quick, so that you can move on to the joy and gratitude and the connection to the humility of the awe of the universe, right? To be in awe of the connection we have as little specks of grain in the constellation of the miracle of of the universe, right? Our purpose is to be connected to that joy and that connection with one another and ourselves. And the grief is the most common obstruction to people living their life of purpose and passion and presence. That's why it's important.
Mm. And you use your music and your projects to help heal that grief. Tell
And
us
what,
about that.
what's so tricky about that is the big commodity in this world today is time. So when I started a project the beginning of this year called 7 Days of Rest and Sacred Renewal, Dr. Shelley Ostroff and Jan Golding have this project from their larger work called Eco Governance. They're based out of Jerusalem. And they're this year coming up is the 6th year of the first 7 days of the year, open source offerings from every continent on the planet. And I met them in October and I started the program every morning from 9 to 10:30. I called Rest in Resonance. Right? And up until that course, I was afraid to play music that would just be music for us to listen to or spoken word and music because I myself was seduced by the addiction of the linear, rational, addicted culture that we've got to be talking, we've got to be filling space, blah, blah, blah. And the revelation that came when we were listening together with a certain theme in mind, a certain purpose in mind, cultivating gratefulness, cultivating awe, cultivating humility, cultivating appreciation for nature, right? And then the music becomes a vehicle that unifies us in the unified field beyond space and time. So suddenly we're like, why I call it the listening fire, is that we reclaim our primordial connection to ourselves, each other, and the earth through listening itself, even on Zoom or on Google Meet or on StreamYard. And so what I discovered was what's happening here? The connection, even online, almost in some ways, even more so online, we were able to have a direct relationship with our understanding of our relationship with one another as a human family in the field, in the unified field. It was such a mind blowing revelation that it's changed the book. The title of my book, I want it to be, is called The Listening Fire. And what I learned, this is what I learned from Jamie Wheel's book, which is called Recapture the Rapture, which is the most important book I've read in the last 20 years. And he talks about these three components as essential pillars for human success. And he calls a catharsis, the ability to deal with our our emotionally, spiritually, physiologically, catharsis, healing. And also state change, which is that ecstasis, our ability to use plant medicine or hack the system with really great nutraceuticals and all the things we know about the human body, state change into higher states of gratitude, higher states of presence, higher states of attention. And then communitas, the essential ingredient of community. And all these three pillars, he's awakened me to the recognition that's the map. Any one of those pillars missing, we're not getting it. What the great opportunity to claim our role as spiritual beings on a human journey requires those three pillars. And music unifies all of that in a beautiful way because it brings you in joy, brings you in gratitude, brings you in humility, brings you in sadness. And I'm sorry I'm talking so long, but I'll just finish this last thing. If music is the universal language of human emotion, you could even say extrapolated, music is the universal language of humanity itself, beyond language, right? So if that's the case, then music has the capacity to reawaken and expand our emotional range. And when we are starting to be more aware of and connected to the nuance of our emotional range, from joy to despair, we are more human. We are more empathic. We are more capable of being of service to one another in every moment. And that's why I feel like music has such an important role to play in this particular time that's gone so dark and divisive.
Yeah. So taking that one step further, taking the music even further, how did you start exploring the benefits of spoken word and in particular your spoken word and wisdom modality? And I think you call it alchem al-
Alchemical wisdom.
wisdom. That I would love to hear more about that. How did you go down that journey? How did you take music and evolve it or explore it into this arena?
You can tell I'm a little kid in a candy store when I start talking about this. I never get tired of talking about this because at the time in 1998, I had the largest music production company in the Bay Area. I'm doing a lot of production in TV, film, commercials, feature films, television shows. Unsolved Mysteries was my work for 15 years, and I scared a lot of children as they were going to bed at 9 o'clock from that theme I wrote. I wrote it actually. But so my dear friend Michael Stillwater and his now wife were doing, Michael was doing songs, spontaneous songs at the bedside of people who were dying but not dying. In other words, there was someone in a bed who was so freaked out by how upset their loved ones were around them that they were dying, that they'd hold on. And the medicine would try to keep people alive by any means possible, almost inhumanely. And then my friend Michael Stillwater would walk up with the Tacoma Hospice and start to sing a song of acceptance and love and unifying everybody into letting the kind of the elephant out from under the rug that this person's really dying, even
Yeah.
though many people would say, no, they're not going, they're not going. And then within minutes, if not at the most an hour, the person died. Everybody cried in a state of celebration of the person's life rather than the terror and the avoidance and the denial and the fear, right? And so when he thought about it, there was a George Soros grant offering artists' response to addressing the issue of loss. And he said to himself, if I were going to die, when I'm going to die, the person whose music I'd want to hear is Gary Malkin's. And I was very touched by that. And we've been friends for a long time. So we started to explore this idea. And originally it was going to be his songs. And I said, Michael, something's calling deeper. And I said, what if you imagine there's a person dying or just received a terminal diagnosis? He had a profound minister's kind of presence and beautiful capacity to speak authentically from spirit. And he went in the studio and I got on an orchestra patch on a piano. And I'm a film composer. I elicit in a way, what is the art of film composing? The art of creating an emotionally resonant field through music that has alchemy with the content in a way that makes you feel what the director wants you to feel in order to bring the story forward or to sell this product or whatever, right? So I just scored from the heart his speaking directly to someone who had just found out that he had a month to live. And when it was done, 7 minutes later, he came out of the studio and said, how was that? And I went, has anyone ever done that before? Has anyone like taken the words of famous wisdom keepers, like from the heart, improvised, tender, authentic, innocent, clear, spiritually profound, and scored it? And suddenly that's when we realized. So we were friends. He was friends with Ram Dass, Thich Nhat Hanh, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, the pioneer of death and dying. And we started to recognize that when we would interview these people, and instead of just accept whatever they had to give, we asked them, like Brene Brown says, for the height of their wholeheartedness, for the depth of their intimacy, their depth of their tenderness, as if they're talking to someone that they were the person they loved most in their lives. And that turned out to be a recipe for what we now know, what I now call alchemical wisdom. Because what happened was, in the context of tenderness, authenticity, and the depth of presence, you'd find a place in these hour-and-a-half interviews where something happened. And it wasn't just the small S self of Deepak Chopra speaking. It wasn't just the small S self of Desmond Tutu speaking. God started to come through, presence started to come through. And we take that section in the interview and I'd stretch it out on an audio editor and then I'd score it like it was a film. And that's what became the work known as Graceful Passages that has touched over 1 million people. But more importantly, it developed this genre for wisdom delivery that alchemizes our engagement with our heart, our soul, our body, more than just our mind. So then when we hear wisdom, we're not just hearing it with our minds and our ears, we're hearing it with our hearts and souls as well. That's the long answer. I hope it's not too long.
No, it's fabulous. So is that what you would consider true wisdom?
That's exactly right. You're the first person in 20 years that has said that simple but profound a statement is it's living wisdom. It's not purely intellectual or dry in that way. So go ahead. That was a wonderful call. I love that.
It's what you do is so important and so profound because it's allowing us to go so much deeper in our own journey, in our wisdom, in our acknowledgments, in our grief, in our love, in our celebration, in our fear. It's allowing us to have a much deeper, much more profound human experience. And then it's allowing us to elevate that through the vibration and the frequency that happens with the music, right? And with that vibrational coherence. We need more of it. Keep it coming. I hope you're not going to retire anytime soon because the world needs more of that. Yes, please. More, please.
Kelsey, you just gave me goosebumps. The resonance and the level at which you're getting what this really could do. And I just want to give you a very personal example. When we came out with Graceful Passages, which is about making peace with and acceptance with our mortality in a way that we could celebrate it rather than be afraid of it. My dream with Michael Stillwater, and was always the sequel has to be on courage in the face of adversity, the tools that will empower us to say yes, and even in the absence of reasons to feel positive about the outcomes of things. This thing, positive thinking, but it's much deeper than that, right? It's vibrating at the rate of trust and faith that all is well, no matter what it looks like, which is Easier said than done for the best of us. I'm going through a passage right now where it's really requiring me to really look in the mirror on, all right, where is your trust, Gary? Because I'm going through a difficult challenge right now. So when the Ukraine border was starting to be surrounded by the Russian army before the war started, I noticed something inside of me that I never experienced before. And I just wondered, what what's going on? There's something so deeply unrest inside of me. And then I realized my father's family comes from the Ukraine. We didn't know it as the Ukraine. It was a Russian Jew, but he was born in 1918 and he had his family for hundreds of years in a little shtetl, a little Jewish village in Russia that they escaped the Tsarist pogroms from. And I was listening to these mothers who being banned, having to leave the country, the exact accent of my grandmother. And I thought, what is going to awaken the kind of courage that the Ukrainians are demonstrating right now? And because I found out that the Ukrainian culture, I have a dear friend who's had a center for spiritual living in the Ukraine for 20 years. The Ukrainian culture has been overridden by other cultures for 6,000 years. Most people don't know that. But because they were an agrarian, peaceful society, they were always overpowered. And so that's what's firing this courage, right? So I decided what if it's the last thing I do, I'm going to find a track about courage. That was the kind of the stake in the ground for the whole resource that I want to do on courage. And it was Lynn Twist, one of my favorite beloved friends and mentors. And I recorded her in 2006. I have a 600-hour archive of 150 wisdom keepers that haven't yet been set to music. And I found it like an oracle deck. And I picked out this recording of Lynn Twist speaking for 30 minutes on courage. And I decided to plunk down my own money and edit it down to 8 minutes long, which took 30 hours, I might add. And then I scored it like a film, like I did Graceful Passages. And this is one of those examples about art imitates life, because when I came up with Graceful Passages music, I was broken. I had a serious accident in the beginning of the process, and my wife left me. And basically, I was experiencing a death. And so, writing the music for Graceful came out of the lava of grief, the creative lava of losing everything that meant something to me, except my daughter. Here I am, 20 years later, wanting to cultivate a new kind of courage. And as I started working on this clay, these words, and setting it to music, I started feeling capable of a kind of courage I never had before. I dedicated it to my father's Ukrainian heritage, but also to the courage we all need right now to show up body, mind, heart, and soul and not just give lip service to greed and to surface egoic seductions, right? So that's my personal testimony to how powerful this work really can be in strengthening ourselves to be the version of ourselves we really deserve to be at this time.
Absolutely. So needed. The courage to show up fully aligned and activated as you, and then the courage to shine brightly, to do the thing that you're here to do, to live your purpose, to make a difference in the world, to be a force for good, to really get into action, get into whatever that action is, even if it's uncomfortable.
This
So,
is why I love you, because when I heard you talk about what you do, I couldn't believe you were talking about only one person.
uh,
And you are such an embodiment, and I don't mean to blow smoke up, but you are such an embodiment of what you just described. So it's really I love the particular flavor of this interview that's focused very much on that, because few people really understand that if we don't have that as a value in our culture, we're going to create more of the same of the chaos and the divisiveness and the disrespect of the planet and the lack of people living in their purpose, their passion, their reason for being here. It's just imagine what this world would be if people were aligned up with their passion like you and I are gifted to do. It's I believe it's possible. And I think it's necessary.
amen. Agreed. Now, a few minutes ago, you referenced some of your own dark passages, some of your own things that you were needing to navigate. So your journey has not always been smooth and easy. Beyond the healing process that comes from the music, how have you been able to persevere through the tough times with that clarity, with that alignment, with that presence, with that openness, and with that purpose?
Time to get real here, huh?
Mhm.
Wow. One of the most persistent obstructions to my awakening has been what I would call a generational addiction to looking at the glass half empty, looking through the eyes of suffering, looking through the eyes of an inner critic, never being good enough, looking through the eyes of what's wrong. There's that famous joke that this Jewish old man is clawing his way through the desert and he's saying, "Oh, am I thirsty?" He's a New York Jewish accent. And then he finally finds the mirage and drinks and eats dates to his fill. And he goes on his way after he leaves the beautiful oasis, not a mirage, the oasis. And he says, "Oh, was I thirsty?" Right? And some could jokingly say that's the history of the Jewish people. So I decided to take that on. And it's a humbling and overwhelming and challenging task because it is what you bonded to as a way to look at the world. And so when I decided that I had contributed to the GDP enough by all the commercials for Bank of America and Gala Wine and the thousands of advertisers I worked for, and when I decided that this was what I was going to do, I had to take a pay cut, like 98% pay cut from what I used to get. I was making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, and now I'm lucky to find a monetizing principle that will help this go where it needs to go. But nothing in me could go back to doing what I knew I could do for lots of money because I had to honor what I knew I was on the right side of history for. And what's been challenging about it is that I had to confront the part of me that looks at my value based on how much money is in my bank account. And it's so insidious that I, as a Jewish boy that grew up and had a lot of success and Emmy Awards and all this, and now I'm doing something I know is right. But frankly, I haven't, I'm still trying to figure out the monetizing, the trainings, the things I'm offering in the world. I'm known all over the world, but no, mostly for what I give. So the challenge for me has been how to have trust and faith as an investment, not a dividend. But so what's happened for me, that's the biggest work that I'm up to, is how am I looking at life as happening for me, not to me? That's essentially it, right? And there are times when I just get really tired of trying to put a positive thinking force field on everything because my definition is a real man has millions in the bank. What I've learned now is that gratitude is a currency, as a come from, as a channel on the radio is the only thing that makes sense. And there are times when I'll lose my way and lose faith and hope in that. But by and large, I know that the work that I'm doing has touched millions of people. And that's the area that I get to define my value as a man by what I love and who I love and what I'm committed to, rather than the culture's awards and tributes for success, right? I have a lot of that in accolades, but that's the area where I get tripped up most. And yeah,
Yeah.
that's
You're not alone in that. So many people get their identity and their worth, define their worth based on the external, based on the accolades and the money in the bank and the house and the car and the awards and all the things. What you're finding is the internal worth. And they, those who are defined by the external are easily rocked
yes.
because you
Right.
can't ever control the external. What you can control is the internal. You
Exactly.
can control your values. You can control your hopes and dreams. You can control the language that you use or the perspective that you hold. You can control the meaning that you ascribe to things, right? You can decide to live in gratitude. You can decide to find the good in everything that happens. You can decide to walk in integrity and authenticity no matter what.
I love you. You're amazing. I love what you just said. That's exactly true. And in that famous phrase, the reward of patience is patience.
Yep.
Well, the reward of integrity is integrity. The reward of presence is presence. All these things are inherent awards that are the gift of being alive.
Yeah.
And if I could play a small role in the signature song that I sing, that's part of the musical I'm creating. We're about to launch a big fundraiser coming up to take this musical to a workshop level, which is 2 weeks with the director and with actors and everything. This is what I believe is a life impactful, profound musical theater project that will remind people about the miracle of life, right? And it's about this young couple that gets unexpectedly pregnant, and they had to face their wounds in order to show up for their relationship so that they can be parents, loving parents for a child that deserves to have a safe environment to be raised in. And so this is one of the songs in the musical is called "Do You Remember Who You Are?" The
Mm.
father sings this song. He's busy like crazy trying to get a startup going, and he's never around to support his wife. Sound familiar to you guys? Like me, when I was thinking as a young 30-year-old that the only way I'd be valuable to my wife is if I made tons of money, right? She wanted me to be home more. She wanted me to be present more. She wanted me to be co-parenting more. So that's is a great musical for that as well. But when the father has a moment and he looks in this awe of this child, will you remember who you are? And he's in awe of this life. This is the kind of energy that is medicine for our times. Because when things are this difficult and you really, so let's fight with the Democratic and the Republican parties. Yeah, we're talking about people that have forgotten what actually is most important in life. And that's what this musical is about. Do you remember who you are is one of my songs that I've written that I sing everywhere to cultivate this community experience of appreciation for we're here.
Yeah.
We're here. It's a miracle. It's a miracle. And we heal. We heal with intention, with clarity, with connection. Anyway, it's
Yeah.
something that never stops being an important medicine, no matter how much money you will or won't have in the bank.
Absolutely. So in the musical, the father has that moment of realization. What was yours?
Ironically, you're the best. I love you as an interviewer. You're just fantastic. You sure there isn't a shill in your little mind that says, okay, this is what's good for Gary to say? It's amazing. When I realized in May, I had this true epiphany in the pool as I was starting to swim, starting to take myself. The wonderful phrase that has been helping me a lot with this material, frankly, is that the only unconditional loving parent you'll ever have is inside of you.
Mm.
And when I decided that I needed my unconditionally loving dad, the one inside of me to take me swimming each day, because he was never around and never present and never guided me through how do you do step by step obedience to your body. Nobody ever taught me that. After 3 weeks of swimming 5 days every morning at 6:30 in the morning, I literally was handed these tablets. These words stopped me. And the words were, revere the animating spark that lives inside of you. You belong to you. Learn to treasure the unique jewel that you are. You say yes to who you are. Nothing is more important. And I literally got this download that the very thing I was depriving myself by this Jewish tendency in my family to look at what's wrong, to complain, to find something wrong with any scenario. Right? What if I started with say yes to yourself? Say yes. And then I shared it with my collaborator, Lisa Raffel, magnificent spiritual teacher and musical shaman that I've had the great pleasure to write a book with and do all kinds of work around helping reframe the way we bring new life into the world. And I said, What if it was say yes to yourself somehow?" And she next day had a download of lyrics of our main character, which was the woman, 25-year-old, who's had a chip on her shoulder from not bonding and trying to go at it alone and push it through. And this awakening for the lead female character in the musical mirrored the moment when I finally said, "What if you say yes to yourself?" And that how many people in this world can share the understanding that the lack of confidence in who you are, the inner critics constantly worrying, the inability, comparing yourself to other people, trying to get other people's approval for how you're doing things, rather than to develop your own intuitive gut and intuition. And when this phrase say yes and that epiphany came to me in the pool, it became our 11 o'clock song, which is what they call the big moment. Like in Frozen, let it go, let it go. We had all these 9-year-olds singing, let it go. It's like it changed young girls' lives when they realized they could let go of the crap in their lives and have agency over how they wanted to live their lives. This song is Say Yeah. It's called Yes, Say Yes. And I Say Yes is the name of the song. And it was the song that won over our producer and said, "You have me. This is Pulitzer material. We're going to go for this." So the awakening, ironically, mirrored what I'm going through right now in saying yes to my journey. And the noise outside is not as holding as much sway for me anymore. That's pretty darn vulnerable content. So there we go.
And it's so powerful and so relatable, right? We have to say yes to ourselves. I always like to frame it as choose you, right? Choose you. No matter what is going on, choose you. Give yourself permission to do the thing, to feel the feelings, to have the experience, right? Say yes to yourself.
Exactly.
So you've touched on this, on the moments of negative self talk, of fear, of judgment, of worry. What is one tip that you have that you can share for people who are experiencing that state, who are trapped in the prison of their mind and the fear and the doubt? How can they say yes to themselves and set themselves free?
There's nothing that could come close to the power of allowing yourself to be impacted by the immersion of nature. So the optimal experience always that nothing can touch is being in a redwood forest and being by the ocean, being smelling and being in the negative ions of that experience. But allowing yourself to be penetrated by the raw and beautiful and immersive power of nature herself. Everything that I have created, especially in the last 10 years when I started focusing on what I call the slow music movement, which is music to entrain the obsession of the linear rational mind to want to take over everything all the time and to induce a state of deeper, longer breathing in beauty that allows our natural wholeness to come back into the heart, into the experience of the body, right? It's all about imitating the experience of trying to hack what happens when we're in nature. How can we do that with beauty itself? How can we do that with space and time by using the elasticity of beautiful music and chords that have textures that awaken our sense of the miraculous, right? Why do we love film scores so much? Can you imagine going to see E.T. or any great movie, Lord of the Rings, if there wasn't any music there? The music is the connective tissue to the heart and the soul, right? So I'm just exploring that and deepening with wisdom ways in which we can actually create what is getting harder and harder for people to experience, especially in the underprivileged and in the have nots cultures, which is what they call a scientific condition, nature deficit disorder. And it's serious, it's a big deal. So the idea is how can we replicate experiences of nature or the results of nature, the calm and coherence and awe, without having to have access to nature. So I literally have a project with my this new company and partners called Aesthetics Audio Systems. And we have this wonderful thing called rejuvenation stations. And we've proven with the actual biometric testing that's inclusive in this device that gives under 8 minutes this 5D, 4K nature immersion visually with my music and sometimes music and wisdom. And right then and there, and right next to, like, you don't have to go to a coffee room for restorative. And they've proven that in under 8 minutes, the heart healthcare professionals can get back into their heart and their soul and their resourcefulness. And they could get back on in what they used to think would have had to take an hour coffee break. And so we have 20 of these in the 5 boroughs of New York right now, using my wisdom films, Islands of Inner Peace. This is what I'm offering also on Gaia TV called Islands of Inner Peace. So the idea is, how do we take beauty itself and create conditions within which our natural wholeness becomes an irrefutable and natural part of the evolution of what happens when we respond to beauty, what happens when we respond to love, what happens when we respond to empathy and kindness and gratitude and presence. These are things that Dr. Keltner of the Greater Good Science Center says we were born with, that our lives live longer evolutionarily when we conspire with the part of us that wants to do good. His famous book was called Born to Be Good. There's some neuroscience to prove this, that we are naturally drawn to states of these kinds of positive generative states. And for me, it's all those things. And if all you have is a minute to try to write yourself, you can use Scott Cody's technique of embodiment, who I adore. He's one of my important teachers in my life. And in fact, he was really what started me in recognizing how unembodied I was. This was when I worked with him 9 years ago in his Art of Leadership Mastery course. But then always the thing to do is grounding and breathing and thinking about something or someone you love. This is the heart math technique. For me, I think about my daughter, my 30-year-old daughter, Genevieve. Just thinking about her writes me. It's like being near a beautiful redwood tree. So these are the tools that are as simple as, or singing in the shower. Whatever works that makes you inspired is a tool to wake you up in that way and remind you of your humanness.
Absolutely. So accessible, right? Those are things that anyone can do. So thank you for sharing some of those tools and strategies to be able to right yourself when things are getting a little dark or overwhelming. Thank you for sharing those to empower others.
Well,
So you mentioned that you have hundreds of hours. You've done all these interviews with the wisdom keepers. You've been privy to the wisdom from the wisest of the wise. What's the best advice any of them have given?
wow, see, you are competing for being like the best interview I've ever had. My God, it's really great how expanded your consciousness is, that really knows where to go to the right questions. I love that. I used to think that I used to avoid meditation, believe it or not, because I used to be afraid of the existential aloneness and the emptiness and the silence that I perceived from that old part of me that was looking at through the glass half empty. When I realized that I had it so completely opposite to what it actually is, which is the unlimited, infinite fullness. It's exactly the opposite. So the very spaciousness of pausing, well, for example, right now in an interview, and allowing you, the listener, you, the viewer, to actually check in while you're looking at this video and to have it be a partnership, a collaboration, a dance between, instead of being 100% of your attention wrapped up in what I'm saying, suddenly the spaciousness allows this to be a dance between me and you and the unified field. And it creates room for the surprising and the unseen to emerge. And I think that rather than answer your question directly, the answer I'll give you is this. Having interviewed over 150 wisdom keepers, extraordinary. I'll send you the list sometime of all the people I've had the great privilege to be in the studio with. The difference between when that person was speaking from the small self, meaning you could tell they were saying things they've said before, to when it was big self came in, to understand that difference between being and stewarding the portal that you are requires the spaciousness to occupy sovereignty over that portal. And what I saw every single time was when they dropped into something bigger than themselves, like the whole room was crackling, and I started to get tears and chills. And I went, Houston, we've made contact. We as humans get to experience grace. Wow.
Yeah.
My spiritual teacher, Miranda McPherson, wrote this book called The Way of Grace. And I study with her. I just produced her Kirtan album as a transmission of the embodiment of all the different archetypes from Hindu, Buddhism, and Sufi religions. And it's no kidding. I'm not kidding here. Grace is real. Grace is possible. And we get to be the sovereign stewards of whether we're going to be an antenna to allow grace to move us. And often that doesn't come when we're busy with agendas, expectations, strategies, attachment, seductions, addictions. It happens when we open to the unlimited fullness of the universe and of the unified field. I don't think I answered your question, but that's my stab at it.
So it's very powerful that we get to experience grace, that we get to be the stewards of grace, that we get to be the embodiment of grace.
Profound.
Very profound. So as we start to wind down here, let's imagine that you are coming to your final passage in this earth. You have lived the life of your dreams, fully activated, fully present. You have been the embodiment of grace and love and kindness and empathy. What do you want them to say about you?
The people that really know and love me know that what you just said is true, that I've lived my life with all those fabulous positive attributes. But they also know that it's been messy, strewn with wounds that were expressing itself in compensatory personality strategies that were not effective, that inserted myself from pain rather than allowance, that made mistakes with people, with follow through, with all kinds of things. The bigger the light, the bigger the shadow. It has not been unmessy. And I think that what I most value and what I most want to be remembered for is that the messy art of being human requires, like, you must be present to win, like they say in Vegas, requires our full presence, our wholeheartedness, and our willingness to be transparent because we're all bozos on this bus, learning every day. And I have been fiercely committed to my transparency, even when it was not very pretty. And I have finally developed compassion. And if you want, even admiration for the part of me that fell down and get up, fell down, got up, fell down, got up thousands of times because somehow I had the emotional intelligence to forgive myself for being a messy human being who wants to grow. And if there's anything that I would say that I would want to most be remembered for, it's that I just never, I always, when I fell down, I just always used it as an opportunity to become a better version of me. And even if it embarrassed the shit out of me, I learned that transparency was my greatest friend. So that's, I think that's one of my major superpowers in this life. And rather than be ashamed of it, I've learned to become an embracer of it.
Yes, yes. And so it shall be, and so they shall say. How can people get in contact with you? How can they buy the albums? How can they get the resources? How can they become part of your universe?
The thing I love to do the most, really, is this one-on-one thing called soul song process. And I meet with you on a private basis for 60 to 90 minutes, and I guide you into your higher self, giving you the prayer that is the most empowering for you at this time in your life. And then we work together to turn it into an AABA song, and we record it, and it becomes part of your talismanic support remembrance tool that you have it available to sing and listen to every day. That is your affirmation, your prayer, your mantra that is entirely yours because we co-created it as a song together. That's called the soul song process. And you can find out about that at wisdomoftheworld.com as well. And then all the downloads are on the website. I love giving keynote speeches on presence and coherence and how it's important for team building and leadership building and all that. Love presenting and facilitating. And all of that information is on my website as well.
I love that all of the resources, all of the services that you provide, all of the ways they can get in touch with you are in one central, easy to remember place. Head to Gary's website and get in touch with this man. There is a song that is within you. There is a legacy to build. There is a passage to navigate. And Gary is the person to help you do it. So head to the website and avail yourself of his resources. Now,
And Dre, I want to say one last thing. If you are a thought leader or a facilitator, I would love to be invited to be one of the secret ingredients of your conference, to be able to bring music in a way that would work in support of whatever modality you're teaching in your workshop, which creates more heart and soul presence and therefore more receptivity. So rather than my own workshops only, I love supporting other thought leaders' workshops as well. So for those of you who are doing your own work online or not, know that I'm available for designing and curating a role that music can make even deeper involvement in your community. So that's something I love doing as well.
and it's really important to actually score an event if you are someone who is hosting a workshop, because as we started the conversation, music is incredibly powerful and it opens us up in ways that nothing else can. So thank you for adding that. Now, as we sign off here today, Gary, any parting words for the audience?
If you find yourself instinctively knee-jerk reacting to death, dying, loss, grief, and illness as a kind of a unconscious knee-jerk avoidance, just remember that what's on the other side of that habitual avoidance is the world of looking through the eyes of gratitude for the preciousness of life. That is the fountain of youth for all evolutionary and purpose-driven activity. Gratitude as an investment rather than a dividend. You're not happy because you're happy. I always confuse this. You're not grateful because you're happy. You're happy because you're grateful. Everything that I'm doing is all about cultivating a state of gratitude and awe for the preciousness of life. And when we look at that place, from that place, everything changes for the better. So that's my parting words. I can't tell you how much this has been so rewarding. You find out so much about a person by how they hold space and how they listen and how they ask. And you are a Rolls Royce. You're beautiful. It's beautiful. Tesla, whatever your fancy is of your favorite car. I loved driving with you today.
Thank you for spending this time with us. Thank you for your wisdom that you are sharing. Thank you for facilitating the wisdom of others and for bringing their wisdom to the world through the music, through the passages. It is incredibly profound, the work that you do. Thank you for activating people to walk in their authenticity, to remember their divinity, to find grace, to find peace, to find ease, to come home to themselves. Thank you for all that you have done. Thank you for all that you are doing. And thank you for all that I know you will continue to do and the millions and millions of lives that you will touch over the generations to come.
Oh my God. From your mouth to God's ears, my dear.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, my dear.
Till next time.
I